Good evening to everyone, and thank you for joining us for the second online event of the public program of our exhibition, Over the Spaces, Gardens of Dreams, which is on view at Art Exchange until the 3rd of July. And so today we will get on a philosophical and psychological journey around the heterotopias of the mind. So to begin with, for a little introduction, the heterotopia is a concept coined by the philosopher Michael Foucault to refer to outer physical spaces that reflect and transform the world at large in various ways, and people place values, imagination, emotions in those unique spaces, and therefore they blur the limits between real and intangible. And though they are outer worlds penetrated by individual inner worlds, so they are in a certain way worlds within worlds. And so then perhaps each person holds within themselves a mental heterotopia. And so each artwork in our exhibition includes heterotopic features derived from the mind. And so we are here today to discuss these ideas and enrich our understanding of the brain and its interaction with spaces and phenomena. And so to explore this topic, we are really pleased and grateful to have with us today 3 scholars from the departments of philosophy and psychology of the University of Essex that I'm going to present briefly. So to begin with, let me introduce Dr. Marie Guilott, who is a lecturer in the School of Philosophy and Art History at the University of Essex. She earned her PhD at the Institut Jean Nicot, and her interest includes philosophy of the mind and the philosophy of language, and their interaction with epistemology, metaphysics, and the philosophy of psychology. And her work covers the first-person indexical concepts, dossier content, subjectivity, self-knowledge, selfhood, personal identity, phenomenal consciousness, and phenomenal concepts. And she is also interested in aesthetics and in the politics of language use. And Dr. Guilott has also published in a variety of journals and is co-editing a book on the phenomenology of mimesis for Oxford University Press. Then we have with us Dr. Jörg Schaub, who is a senior lecturer in philosophy at the University of Essex. He received a doctoral degree in philosophy from Goethe University in Frankfurt. His current research focuses on aesthetics and democratic politics, critical theory, contemporary political philosophy, and German idealism. And he's the author of the monograph Justice as Reconciliation, John Bull's Political Liberalism. And he has published articles in journals such as European Journal of Philosophy, European Journal of Social Theory, Critical Horizon, Res Publica, and Mittelweg. And he is as well the co-editor of the Essex Studies in Contemporary Critical Theory. And finally, Dr. Bettina Zangal is joining us today. She's a lecturer in the Department of Psychology at the University of Essex, and she earned a PhD at Northern Illinois University. And Dr. Zangal is interested in how our motivation and emotions influence our memory. And her work includes the effects of self-protection on recall for positive and negative feedback, the fading of effect for autobiographical events, and nostalgia. And she has published widely, including in journals such as the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology and Memory. And she's currently finalizing research projects related to nostalgia. And so first, our invited speakers will carry out an exploration of the concept of heterotopias in link with their research. mediated by the members of our curatorial team, and then they will discuss its relation to the exhibition. And in a second phase, we will open the conversation further with questions from the audience. So now let's begin, and I'm going to hand over to my colleagues Norma and John.
Thank you, Sophie. Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for showing up for this online talk. We are really happy to be able to explore in a more conceptual basis our exhibition. And I will start with a question that is apparently from the title of this panel, quite something we admitted as being true, but that should be discussed. And so the first general questions that I'd like to start the discussion with is to what extent is the mind a heterotopia? So we know that from antiquity, the mind has been defined, for example, as the palace memory and explored. And we would like to know if, in the panelist opinion, it really can be qualified as a heterotopia in the sense of Michel Foucault definition. Do we have anyone who'd like to have the very difficult task to start the discussion?
I don't want to go first, but if nobody else steps forward, you are very welcome to sort of point at me and tell me, Jörg, you go.
As you wish. Marie Guilott, do you feel able to talk about this?
Well, I don't know if I have a good answer to that question, but maybe I can help making the question more difficult. I mean, it seems to me that there's something appealing about saying, yes, the inner sanctum is the ultimate heterotopia, because it's not only a distinct space, but there's a kind of exclusivity to it. No one else can experience my experiences. They can only experience theirs. But what makes it tricky is that you can't really say that the mind is a place other than metaphorically. So what's interesting about Foucault's concept, I'm not at all Foucault specialist, but what little I understand of it is that he's interested in those spaces that are not utopias, in the sense that they have a location in physical space. He's talking about, for example, cemeteries or convents, military academies, and so on and so forth. So places that are other, but that are in actual physical space. And the mind isn't really clearly like that. I mean, it's a tricky question, isn't it? Because you can't really say that your thoughts and desires and intentions have a precise location. There's a brain, of course, but the relationship between mind and brain is very disputed. You can't really say that your thoughts have a weight or an up and down, an extension. So I confess myself to be puzzled, and I find it to be a really intriguing but difficult question to answer. So maybe my colleagues will be more decisive.
Yeah, in that case, I'll jump in there and thank you for opening up and making it more difficult, because I do agree that this is a really complex question. In a way, yes, absolutely. No one else can really know precisely what I feel like. So this is metaphorically my own internal space. But on the other hand, we are very much informed by our environment, by our interaction with others. So it's not like our internal world can be completely weird and disconnected from what other people experience. There is definitely some overlap, and in that sense, yeah, it's individual, it's different, but it's also not disconnected from each other. I would like to leave it at that point.
Is it okay, Norma, if I go first?
Yes, of course, please.
I think you invited 3 people and they have sort of different takes on things. And I guess, like, I find it sort of, I sort of was very puzzled by this thing, of an inner garden. Like the metaphor of inner garden really fascinated me. But before we go to the gardening section, sort of, I think if I think about the mind in relation to spaces, I think I thought about sort of, from the background of my own account of what sort of aesthetics is about. I think there's a way in which the mind makes spaces other than they are. Yeah. So, and I just want to talk a little bit about how basically, I think sort of we are sort of beings that make the spaces we encounter different spaces. That in the sense of that sort of, in the very moment you sort of start using your senses to explore a place, yeah, you will respond to it in different ways. Like it could be spooky for you, it could be sort of remind you of other things, and then it becomes another space because you relate it to other spaces that you've previously known. So and then you sort of start to basically you can play with this, yeah. You start playing with these spaces. So in a way, you cannot put human beings in a place and it just remains that place. Human beings are the kind of things that make any space into another space. And sort of in different ways. So each of us would basically interact with a space, and in this interaction, that space would acquire certain qualities, relationships to other spaces. You would think about, I don't know, just an example, when I think about our house, yeah, my wife wants to knock this wall down by the other one, you know. So none of our spaces are ever spaces for us, but we make them, at least anticipate them becoming other. So there's a continuous way in which human beings transform spaces. So I think so heterotopia is for me the kind of things we do all the time, yeah. From the very banal thing, like if I think to go to a department meeting, I think, oh, how could that, I don't know, that room is horrible. Like I start in the department meeting thinking about how stupid I was to sit on this side, or the window should be there so that you have a nicer view of the tree. Sort of like human beings are making spaces different from what they are all the time. That's sort of how I got my head into heterotopia. And then of course there are sort of, and that is sort of the interaction of the human mind with spaces rather than the human mind itself being space-like. So that's first thought.
Yes, Dr. Guilott.
I'm really interested by what my colleagues have just said, and I was actually expecting Jörg to latch on a slightly different dimension of the concept of heterotopia. So there's this idea for Foucault that heterotopias are spaces of contestation of the broader space that they're enclosed in, or something like that. And I was intrigued by that aspect as well, because of course it doesn't always happen. We can be we can think in conformity to what we're mandated to think, but that's also the space of critical thinking. So that, I mean, that's kind of a very obvious thing to say, but still I think it's worth saying that it's that space of contestation, because it's a space of creativity and spontaneity. So what's in there is, yes, in some kind of interaction, as Bettina has said, with the outside world, intersubjective relations and so on, but there's also this potential for something other emerging from that space, and that contestation of what we already have in the broader shared space. So yeah, I was expecting that point to be made by Jörg, and you would have made it much more precisely and forcefully and convincingly. But that is certainly, I think, a point in favor of the inner world as heterotopia.
Can I just say one word to that? So that I think what Marie says is sort of that you insert spaces that are contesting the spaces that surround them, yeah, is in a way made possible by what I described before. So the human capacities to go beyond the spaces they encounter, yeah, to sort of always are beyond the spaces they actually encounter, allows us in the first place, for instance, to insert heterotopias into our worlds. Like, I don't know, a recent example that is political would be sort of, well, nobody remembers this anymore. I can't even remember. What was it? Occupy Wall Street, yeah? So when the Occupy movement, when you basically, so a long time ago, when people were outside and hanging out together. Anyways, so that you sort of, you require the idea that the spaces could be no longer what they are right now, and how they could be transformed in order to occupy them, to sort of build a counter space. So in a way, that what I described before, that you sort of encounter spaces, and then you see how they qualitatively appear to you, and then sort of creatively go beyond them, makes heterotopias in the actual build sense possible. And so I think this kind of counter spaces that are disturbing the existing spaces, that you sort of insert into them in some way or another, is sort of made possible by this. It's one particular use of your capacity to sort of transcend the spaces, or inevitably transcend the spaces you find yourself in.
Yes, that was a very, very helpful outlook. And maybe we should have had this talk before the exhibition, because it took us really a while to coin and adapt the concept of Foucault to artworks and into making an exhibition. And so in the end, yeah, we thought that the mind creates heterotopias. It sort of is a heterotopia, but as you said, Dr. Guilott, it's not physical space, it's space of contestation, and that this richness and the complexity of the question really appealed us, and it is a source of really creation for the artist and the thinkers. And so the next question will be asked by my colleague, John.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think what we kind of thought was thinking of kind of the dream realm and the subconscious, and kind of the intersection of phenomenal experiences, but distorted by emotion and misremembering, or that kind of thing as well. But it's all really good stuff, that thing. But the next question is, how can inner and outer spaces be brought into harmony?
I feel like in a quiz show now. Like, what's the right answer?
Like, because one of the main themes of our exhibition is kind of thinking about healing as well. So I don't know who would want to step up to answer that first.
All right, I'll take a stab, at least insofar as I can talk a little bit about, from my own research, when we are not in harmony, when we have, let's say, someone with psychological problems. I'm thinking specifically, let's say, of mild cases of depression. People tend to see their environment differently in that case. Typically, it's actually found that they see it as more realistic, that when we are psychologically in a good place, we actually tend to distort a little bit towards the positive. Where you can see that in my own research is that when you think about experiencing an event and how you feel in that moment, those emotions tend to be there stronger when you're experiencing the event as compared to later when you're thinking back of what happened, let's say a month, a year ago. When you then make the distinction between pleasant and unpleasant event, you can see that there's actually what is called a bias, the so-called fading affect bias, where we tend to actually maintain the positive affect associated with pleasant memories better over time, everything else being equal, as compared to the negative affect associated with unpleasant events. One of the rare places in psychology where good wins over bad. Why I'm bringing this up in this context is because this kind of fading affect bias, that way of maintaining a positivity of affect, is actually associated with psychological health. You see that very much diminished when someone has mild forms of depression. So in a way, my piece of the puzzle there would be to say that some form of inner positivity towards the self is one part that is definitely needed for some form of harmony that then gets carried back out towards the outer world.
Happy to follow up.
Yeah, sure.
So such a broad question, but again, starting with another question, why think that the default is necessarily a disharmony or a divide between the inner and outer world? I think Bettina would be much more competent than I am to speak about that, but one direction of research in psychology and in the philosophy of psychology in recent years has been a new emphasis on the ways that those two things are really enmeshed. So it seems tidy, and it's kind of easy to think in terms of, okay, there's the inner and the outer and their interaction. So when we engage in certain behaviors, we're active, so we do stuff to the world outside. And when we perceive, we're passive, we're receptive, so the world does stuff to us, but there are those two polarities. But psychologists, I believe, are finding increasingly that that's way too simple, and there isn't this neat divide really between passive and active, and between outside and inside, in the sense that if you look at action, that's not just, so to speak, mind to world direction of fit. We act because we take advantage of what the Gibsonian tradition has called affordances. So the world presents to us some things that are actionable. It's this kind of dance. It's not just us imposing our plans on the world, but we kick a ball because a ball is kickable. We stroke a cat because a cat is strokeable. And if you look at the other direction of this interaction, when we perceive, we're not just passive, we're also active, in the sense that to even tell the difference between what is an outer stimulus, what is information coming from outside, and on the other hand, what is spontaneous, for example, imagination, dreaming, and so on. Our brain has to do something. So when we are the origin of changes, we send motor commands, and we have feedback loops on those motor commands, so we can check whether the stimuli we receive match those motor commands, and that tells us, okay, that comes from me. While when information comes from the outside without prior action on our part, there isn't this information from inside that we should expect this and that effect. So that absence of a fit tells us, oh, that came from outside. That's actually a percept, as opposed to me having done something or dreamt up something or something like that. So there's no pure perception in the sense of something purely passive, purely receptive. Even perception is a form of action to an extent. So it seems that in the most basic of our cognitive functions, we're enmeshed with the outer world through and through. Again, I'm saying this in very layperson vocabulary, and Bettina is probably horrified, but I think it's a fair question whether the default is this, this polarity, or whether, you know, we're embedded, we are part of this context that moves with us, and that we act upon, as well as being acted on by it. And maybe then, as Bettina was suggesting, this harmony is the pathological thing to an extent. So again, another answers.
Yeah, thank you. Let me just quickly respond to that. I'm not at all horrified. I was so stuck in my own research that I didn't start with a broader picture. And yes, things are always a lot more complicated. And for a research perspective, it's sometimes helpful and also a great hindrance that we slice up reality in a way that makes it easier for us to actually look at specific effects. So yes, definitely you have that, and let's keep with a non-technical language, that enmeshing from let's say the inner world with the outer. It gets even more complicated because you have to consider that our, let's say, capacity for attention, even for cognition, is very much limited. So there is some fun research out there that you might have come across where people are instructed to watch some students passing a ball to each other, and they are told to count how many passes there are. And while people are busy concentrating on that, what typically happens is they don't notice that someone in a gorilla costume enters the stage, inserts himself in there and leaves again. And it typically requires a second replay of that film to make the students that actually follow the instructions realize what has been going on. So it's, in this case, it's an example how our attention is very much focused on something and we ignore the rest that doesn't fit. Likewise, when you're thinking about something complicated like categorization, or that could lead to, let's say, prejudice, this is also a way for us to save us time and energy, because if we look at every single instance, let's say, of a car in a carpool, to stay with something neutral, that takes up a lot of cognitive effort to look at each one as individual item. It's much easier to say carpool, lots of cars, and to store it away like that. So it makes that whole interaction between inner and outer world a lot more complicated to take all of these things into account.
Thank you for that.
Do you want me, or you heard enough about harmony?
Go ahead.
I don't know. I have something to say, very crude. After so much differentiation between the inner and the outer, I cannot compete with that. I have very simplistic views. But the thought I had is sort of, when you talk about harmony, you basically, as Marie, I think, implied, is you start from a sense of disharmony. Yeah, and there's something that, like, is some kind of negativity that shows up to you. Yeah, and that happens to human beings probably 1,000 times every day, to different degrees of intensity, that we are unhappy or displeased or annoyed by things. Yeah. So I don't know, my cat chasing me when I go in the kitchen and biting me in the ankle, like in my leg, and I sort of have sometimes things like that. Yeah. So I guess the question of harmony shows up. Yeah, I don't know, to speak Hegelian in a way. Yeah, simplistically. Yeah. So basically, the problem of harmony only appears when there's against the backdrop of an experience of disharmony. Yeah. So something has to be experienced negatively for you to think about how to overcome it. Yeah. And I think it's a natural thing, I guess, for human beings when they experience something as negative, to think about A, how to avoid it, or B, how to change it. Yeah. And then you can, for all kinds of reasons, things, I don't know how to change it. I don't have the power to change it. So there are layers of negativity that come with negativity sometimes. But the primary instinct is probably try to, how can I avoid it, or how can I change it? And so harmony building is basically presupposes things that are actually not great in your view. And it comes with a certain form of openness. Yeah. So so typically, if you know what you don't want, doesn't mean that you know what you want. Yeah. And that's a beautiful open horizon of human life. Yeah. Where creativity comes in. So if I don't know, I have stupid examples all the time, but let's say somebody offers me, do you want this prawn sandwich? And I feel absolutely not like prawn sandwich at night. It still doesn't tell me what I should eat instead. Yeah, what I feel like is a completely different thing. Yeah. Or if I don't like that window, I don't know what window to replace it with immediately. So, and I think that kind of, so you can think about human life as something that are almost like pragmatist, like where you basically encounter negative experiences encounters and then sort of pick your battles. Yeah. And when you pick your battles, it's not that you just generate harmony, but you try out alternatives and see how they appear to you qualitatively. And so in a way, I think the transformation of spaces or the transformation of lives is in part driven by that. Like from your experiences in relationships to spaces you inhabit, to cars you drive. Yeah, I'm not gonna buy a car of that brand anymore because whenever I buy one, it breaks down after this, or that problem occurs, or that internet router is shit, and blah blah blah. Whatever it is, yeah. So human beings sort of are trying to. Our lives has a certain degree of openness because we are willing to pick certain battles, and those battles are sort of typically to overcome things that are bad rather than mess with things that are already good. You know, like we typically deploy less energy in changing things that already work well. And so I think that there's something perfectionist about us. Yeah, you know, like in principle, we only keep the bad things if we think it's unavoidable, or I cannot fight so many battles at the same time. And that's, I think, beautiful because it's a source of creativity, because knowing the bad doesn't know you know the good or versions of the good and things like that. And I think that is in part where I think creative interactions with the world and the arts that are about reimagining things are very important, because a lot of people know what they don't like. Very few people know how to do things otherwise.
I wanted to also follow up on things Jörg said earlier about the previous question, and another assumption behind your question. I guess we could discuss whether it's true that aiming for harmony between the inner and the outer worlds is always what we should do. When Jörg was talking about the capacity that the mind has to shape other spaces, you know, that opens up the possibility that sometimes the right thing to do is to create this harmony and clash with reality as it is, hopefully to change it and maybe on the horizon create a different harmony. I don't know, but there's something positive sometimes about going from a state of acquiescence to you know, a state where you want to drive a wedge, and again, when we do that as creatures with a mind, then maybe indeed we act as a heterotopia, as a, I don't know, but yeah, the framing of your question suggested that harmony is a thing to aim, but it depends what it is that we're supposed to be in harmony with, isn't it? So I was struck. The catalog is really beautiful, and there's so many things to say about all the artworks, but I was struck by this dimension of slight uncanniness in almost all the artworks. They're beautiful, they're immediately pleasing in some ways, but there's also something slightly unsettling about all of them, and that is harmony, that otherness and slight discomfort that I'm feeling looking at them, I think is actually a good thing about them.
Yeah, all the works do really have that, because all of them kind of distort either memories or views or ideas in different ways. And that's one of the most effective things I think about the assembly. But next we have some questions that are more directly aimed at each academic. And I will start with a question for, sorry, you've just finished speaking, but for you, Marie, if that's all right. This one is about how does the imagination interact with mental stores and utilize phenomenal templates? Because I guess we're thinking about distortions in the brain and how these like phenomenal states can be utilized to create different visions of things and that kind of thing.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm not a specialist of imagination, but I can say something. I can speak to this question as best I can. So I do work on phenomenal thoughts, which are a kind of thought that we have when we use aspects of our experiences to think about objects in the world or about experiences themselves. So, for example, you know, the first time as a child, you have the sensation of pins and needles. That's not a thing outside in the world. It's. I mean, it might give you some information about a state of your body, admittedly, but the thing that's very striking about it is the pure phenomenal quality of it, that weird sensation. So once you've had that, you can store that qualitative feel in your memory and then reuse it to think about that sensation. Or it's like, you know, your familiar headache or back pain. You can think about the back pain directly using the pain itself as a kind of label for that very same pain. You sort of reactivate the unpleasant sensation to think about that sensation. So it's something a little bit like what you do when you want to discuss a specific shade of color, you know, the shade you're going to use to repaint your room or whatever. So you could describe it, but the other thing you can do is you can exhibit a little square, a little sample of that very paint. You know, is this red? Is this bright orange? So you think about the thing not by representing it, but by presenting it or sampling it. And that's what we do with phenomenal thoughts, right? So imagination comes in different kinds. We can imagine abstract possibilities, you know, what if we manage to eradicate COVID once and for all? That's a form of imagination, and it's quite dry and abstract. I mean, if we want, we could call that, say, semantic imagination, by analogy with semantic memory. But there's another kind of imagination where we are immersed in a scene we're imagining. Part of it might be made up of memories, maybe not. But there's something. There's this kind of experiential richness about it. So if I imagine taking a dip in the North Sea, it's very vivid. I imagine the bitter cold, the howling wind in my ears. There's this kind of perspectival element. Waves come at me. So we might call that episodic imagination if we want to distinguish from other kinds of imagination. And when we do that, typically we use those phenomenal concepts. So we think about the experiences we would have in the imagined situation using those very experiences. So one thing that intrigues me about that kind of imagination, I have to say, is that, well, we often think of imagination as there's some kind of disconnect, or there's something a bit, there's some dimension of escapism about imagination that gives us a break from reality and so on. We're thinking about situations that are counterfactual or alternative to reality, or not confirmed anyway, merely possible. We don't know if they're real. But whenever we imagine in this phenomenal mode, this episodic mode, immersed in a scene. What's striking is that we have direct contact with those phenomenal qualities themselves. I mean, the back pain that we reimagine, it's right there. You can feel it again. Or, the taste of chocolate that you imagine, you can really get that quality itself on the tongue. So in a way, because of the nature of those qualitative experiences, or qualia, as philosophers sometimes call them, that form of imagination is in fact a way of knowing certain aspects of reality, the phenomenal dimension of it, very, very intimately. So instead of being a form of escapism, this form of imagination is really a mode of knowledge, really. It makes you grasp the thing itself. It's really right there in your face in a way that even perception doesn't, I mean, that's maybe a controversial thing to say, but some philosophers would want to say that perception doesn't really put you in as direct a form of contact to the object as you have when you're acquainted with the qualitative feel of your experiences. So yeah, I mean, that's one thing maybe that can be said about imagination and phenomenal templates. That way, it turns imagination into a way of knowing reality very intimately, instead of trying to escape from it and flying away from it. I'm sure my colleagues will completely disagree with that, but that's my 2 cents on it.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I mean, I'm thinking about my own experiences. I'm thinking about when say you have a dream and there is something, I don't know, let's say a natural disaster, like a tidal wave or a tsunami. I'm thinking, like, when I've been stressed, I'll have like a random dream of like a natural disaster or something. Is that kind of your emotions or your, I don't know, subconscious utilizing, say, like some bad film that I've seen where there's been a giant mega tsunami, and using that to kind of translate the way that I'm feeling into my dream world?
So that's, I mean, that's a sort of picture of imagination that would be encouraged by so philosophers tend to really like that idea of, we recombine elements that we found in perception. So Descartes famously was very much of that view, and all the people whose conception of memory is based on the idea of memory as a trace would also really favor that. But again, speaking as someone who is out of my depth there, it seems to me that the view in psychology isn't it's not uncontroversial that memory acts as some kind of storage room for those traces, and it seems that at least in some forms of memory, that there's a lot more going on already at the encoding stage, and there's already, as you might say, some imaginative work being done at the point where you memorize information that you might then redeploy to dream up something fantastical out of those component parts. So who knows? I think that's very much an empirical question, what's going on. So again, one that Bettina might be best qualified to answer.
Yeah, in theory, but let's say social psychology as a field very much shies away from the term subconscious. And it's much more framed in the terms of automaticity. So things that happen under the hood that we are not consciously aware of, that we are not controlling. Let's say that you're very well versed in driving a car, and I am sure it happened to you, then it certainly happened to me, that you are kind of lost in your own world and you suddenly realize, wow, I've covered half the distance and I have no memory and no concept at all how I got here. That would be an example of automaticity, things that are so ingrained in you, you're so well versed in that they can run without conscious control. When it comes to dreams, then we are very much straying towards the field of psychoanalytical thought and Freud, and modern social psychologists are not particularly fond of being associated with Freud. So I'm kind of trying to shy away from talking about dreams. What I can more easily talk about is that, yes, when we are experiencing things, first of all, we have that step of what do we actually pay attention to. But then there's also an interpretation of what is actually going on there, some form of judgment also. And then that experience or that part of the experience gets then encoded in memory. And so certain connections are being made with your already existing memory system. And if you consider that that is, of course, different for every one of us, it might explain that when you come together, let's say with family members, and you're trying to talk about a specific event that happened in the past, sometimes you get very divergent stories of what actually happened there. And in part, that is the encoding part. In other part is then the actual remembering that is also not unproblematic. So rather than going into the dream part, let me throw out this food for thought that I'm not sure if any of you here, certainly not the panel members, are tempted to think of memory as something like a computer storage. It's really not. I tend to agree with the line of thought to see memory rather as a function that helps us survive in the present and plan for the future. And so what we remember and how that our part in the past, our life story, gets remembered and brought into the present very much is influenced by our present situation. Let me give you an example. Let's say we're talking about an college entrance test. Depending on your situation now, you might misremember how well or badly you did in the past. If you're in a place where you really feel that you have to change things, that you have to be on a forward projective, you might actually remember your performance as less good than it was. You might also be in a place where you need that positive buffer of knowing that you have done well in the past and you will do well again in the present, and you might inflate how well you did. It all depends. And so I'll just throw this bit out there and just leave the space as well for Jörg, in case you want to chime in here at this point.
I think I don't. I'm just enjoying how well Marie is able to imagine chocolate. You know, I always have to go and eat it and pile on the pounds like. But for Marie, she even knows it better when she just imagines. No, it's just and how afraid you are talking about dreams. So I leave it at these comments. I think for now. I guess I get my own special question in a moment.
Yeah, I guess what you were saying, Bettina, kind of leads into, and you've already spoken about this bit, but we want to ask, why is it that people tend to retain more good memories?
Well, first of all, I don't really know if they retain more good memories, because really that would require that we run studies where we really dig deep into what do people remember, what do they not remember, and deal with the problem that some things people just don't want to talk about, and they won't. But what tends to be the case is that phenomenon that I described before, where in the very least, the feelings that we have associated with those memories, we maintain the good emotions better than the bad ones, meaning we let the bad go in that way. What you could think about is how would our life actually look like if we had predominantly bad memories stored. Now, I'm not saying that in general there's not some utility to remembering bad things that happen. It certainly makes sense. Let's say you have someone who deceives you, you might want to remember that so that when you're in the same situation again, you know to not trust that person. That is something that has utility. But if you were to remember only the bad things that happen in your life, then these are the kind of thoughts and comparisons that come to mind very quickly when you're encountering a new situation, and you'd be inclined to interpret it in a way that also has more of a negative slant. Does it really help you survive? You would overlook a lot of good possibilities. You might not be able to make friendships that could later aid you in life. It just tends to be the case that if you have a store of positivity that you can rely on, that also has a trajectory towards the future. That is also very closely related to nostalgia that I haven't talked about yet, but is part of my research interest. Nostalgia is modernly defined as a bittersweet feeling that is typically associated with meaningful events of your past. That part being the positivity, but the bitter part coming in because these are, of course, things that are irrevocably in the past and that you can't get back. Here as well, you have kind of a mixed bag. You have the negativity in there as well, but it is overwhelmingly positive, at least as far as we can say from research so far. And it does have by that a trajectory into the future insofar as one of those factors that have been found to be associated with people that are more nostalgic is that they tend to have higher levels of optimism and inspiration, and thus you can think of it as a reservoir that helps you to deal with the challenges of your everyday life. If you don't have that reservoir, life gets a lot harder.
Thank you very much. This is very enlightening, especially when we think about some of the artworks of the exhibition. And I'm thinking about Abigail Lence's piece where she based all her work on a memory. And I think that we had a talk with her. It was really something very emotional, and that was the source of the creation. And so finally, we have a question, especially for Jörg, and it's kind of it will sum up some of the answers we had previously, because I'd like to ask you: do you think that discovering and cultivating our inner garden as being that place we store the memories Bettina mentioned, for example, makes us free individuals? And how would you define this form of freedom that would be obtained possibly thanks to our inner garden?
Thank you for this. I think this is sort of I'm not as sharp-minded as Marie, who immediately sees everything in all its subdivisions and sections. But I am smart enough to see this is several questions in one. Can I start with something that I've been sort of intrigued by from the very beginning, the very notion of an inner garden, before I say how cultivating it might or might not contribute to our freedom. So when I heard the notion of the inner garden for the first time, I was thinking, what is an inner garden? Yeah, it's like something I'm really trying to get my head around. The more I think about it, the more I like it. And sort of like, unsurprisingly, yeah, when you wonder what is an inner garden, you first ask yourself, so what is a garden? And then think about how I can make the gardens I know, how could they sort of be replicated or have a life inside me too? Yeah, so that led me to the question, and I'm sort of probably going completely wrong in this, but sort of let's think about the garden. Yeah, I think the garden is a really interesting phenomenon. Yeah, because it's in a way, you could say, it's the site for an encounter between culture and nature. Yeah, so you have a garden so that nature is there. Yeah, it's like typically a garden is full of plants, and you sort of pick the ones you want and let them grow over years and things like that. So so the garden, what's interesting about the garden is that it's nature, but at the same time it's not just nature, because nobody can live in nature. Yeah, like, you cannot go to the garage if it's just nature, because, like, I don't know, too much grass, too much other things. So then you start cultivating it. Yeah, so the garden is sort of a cultured nature. And I think that makes the garden a very nice example of what we are ourselves in a way. Yeah, so with this weird mixture of a natural being and a cultured being. Yeah, so the garden is in a way a metaphor for ourselves, and so what it then means to cultivate your inner garden, yeah, is sort of to be concerned with how your inner nature, like your own nature, and the culture of which you're part, the social world of which you're part, interact. Yeah, and then the question is sort of, it's easier to know what it means to cultivate a garden. Yeah, it's harder to sort of understand what it means to cultivate yourself. And this is the part I'm really interested in. I see that Marie posted something. I don't have to talk. I'm not sure how far I have to, but if you want to come in and just tell me, I'm not a multitasker. No, good. Marie doesn't want to tell me what she just wrote, and I insist I'm not reading it until until I'm done with this. And even if I'm now going completely the wrong way, and Marie was sending me a warning, don't go any further. You're completely on the wrong track. But anyways, so the question is sort of, how do we encounter our nature inside ourselves? Yeah, so that would be the gardening question. Yeah, so how do we, and that's a real question. Yeah, so how do we relate to us as natural beings? Yeah, we do so like with all kinds of concepts, with all kinds of ambitions that are sort of very permeated through and through the culture in which we are part of. Yeah, and so it's easier to sort of get nature in your garden than to get to your own nature. Yeah, so I've been thinking about this. When I started thinking about that, I was thinking about this Jan Valek pictures. Yeah, where you only have the whales, and it's like whale after whale after whale, and you never get to the thing you actually wanted to see, namely the nice plants, which are yourself in a way. So your inner garden, you never get to it. It's just the whales, and so. But there's a sense in which, I guess, there's a rudimentary or some level of spontaneous ways in which we react to the world we're in. Yeah, so human beings are famously, and I've talked about that negativity before, we are sort of famously easy to dissatisfy. Yeah, so your I don't know, your dad or mother tell you, yeah, you should be happy with what you achieved. I'm not so happy. Like, I don't know. Like, so that there's ways in which you're sort of out of sync with what you could expect to be the case, yeah, or what you should feel about your situation, and so on and so forth, and hiya. My daughter just came in. Disney Channel wasn't interesting enough. And then, sorry, now I find it really hard to not be distracted. But could she close the door? Sorry. Could you close the door? Good. I lost my train of thought completely. And she's coming back probably in 1 second. So I think there's a way in which our inner nature shows itself. Yeah? If we are attentive to how it is for us to live the lives we're living. Yeah. In a way, we can never get directly to our inner nature. Yeah. So I think that's why the whale picture spoke to me. Yeah. So it's basically just like how I respond to this particular kind of setup of which I'm part and which I cannot just leave behind. So it's sort of only indirectly, like something about rubs me the wrong way and there's nothing I can do about it. But it doesn't tell me anything of what my nature positively is. It just can see it reflected in my response to that kind of setting in which I find myself. And sort of cultivating that would be sort of to be attentive to that. So to make it a habit or a habitus, to be attentive to how you qualitatively experience the thoroughly cultivated or social nature life of which you're part in, to sort of keep track of the nature within you in a way, even though you can never have it positively and straightforwardly, but only sort of in the way you respond to the social forms that are the form of your life, basically. So I talked a lot about this, and maybe I stop here. I haven't. So
someone's on the train.
So I think it would be worth maybe saying a little bit something about this inner garden, and because it's such an important theme of the title, and maybe how it could relate to any of the artworks. Before I say anything about freedom, maybe anybody else wants to say something about the gardens, the ones outside and the ones inside us, because I really struggled with sort of making sense of the very notion of an inner garden. But at the same time, the longer I thought about it, the more intriguing I found the idea to be sort of not just gardening outside, but also gardening inside, and what that could mean.
Well, I think, Marie, what you wrote in the chat is quite relevant regarding that notion of garden and curating wellness as art making. And our concept of inner garden came basically more from the French expression of secret garden. And so this was also curating a fun fact. We talk about secret garden as French people with my colleague Sophie to the rest of the team, and especially British colleagues. And they didn't have really that expression in English. And so we tried to meet halfway through the languages, and it ended up with the inner garden. It's not secret garden, which could be not, we felt inner garden made more sense in English, but I get that for a first encounter can be quite difficult, but it is, as Marie wrote in the group chat, something about curating wildness and an encounter of nature and culture, and trying to tame and order things or leave a bit of a wild space also. In some gardens you have very different ways of gardening, but I mean, I'm not a specialist of that topic, so I might not keep on talking about gardening. So, Marie, would you like to add something about the curating wildness?
I was so interested by what you just said about the curatorial process and how there was this element that was lost in translation in a way, because I'm struck by how what Jörg was describing, this kind of idyllic space that is a real space, that is a private garden, but an actual garden with plants and birds and so on. How much a cultural phenomenon it is here in Britain. I mean, that's kind of an art that's brought to perfection. I mean, in other cultures as well, but to me, much more than what also speaking as someone coming from France. I think we're just not as good at creating a secret garden as our British friends are. I really like that Jörg has emphasized that notion of the garden, both inner and the actual garden that we might create. Because another tension there is there. So there's what Jörg has said between what's wild and what's carefully cultivated, but there's also this looking at the philosophical tradition and at what the Epicureans have to say about the garden. There's also this other tension between outer and inner in the same space. A garden where you grow plants. That's a bit of nature, as Jörg said, but what makes it very appealing is also that it's a private space or a space for a community, the community green and so on. So there's this dimension of privacy, or somewhere that has a degree of seclusion that is part of the concept. So reading that back into the inner garden, I wonder if that's also what makes the metaphor of the garden so effective, namely, when we look inside, when we introspect, we find, yes, both the wild and the curated, as Jörg was saying so well, but we find both the inner and the outer, as Bettina was saying at the start. So yeah, multi-layered in many ways as an image. I couldn't agree more with Jörg on that.
Yeah, I think you've done a really good job of now grasping the concept and the metaphor of the garden as a place of ambiguity and of the veneration of nature, but also at the same time a weird kind of like bulldozing of nature. But anyway, next we have some questions that more relate to the artworks and the exhibition itself. I think Norma is going to ask the first one.
Yeah. So maybe, Sophie, if we could have the little beautiful slides you made with the artworks of the exhibition.
Yeah, of course.
That would be great. Thank you. Because I like to simply ask to all three of you. So I know that seeing an artwork in an online catalog is not the same thing as seeing it in presence. But in your opinion, which for you, it's really about personal feelings and relation to the artworks. Which artwork in the show, so we've talked a bit about Valak, for example, represent to the best that notion of inner garden. So we'll have the artworks, and once again we'll need first speaker. Okay. Marie, do you want to go ahead, or was that a thumbs up?
Oh, so I don't mind if I'm speaking fast. I'll try to be very brief, but indeed, those particular pieces were, so I found the whole exhibition, I mean, in the virtual form that I saw it, really beautiful. Those particular pieces by Zangal, I think spoke to me the most. The process that he describes using photosensitive film, but when that is already aged and will interfere with the capture of the image, and then having elaboration in the darkroom. I thought that was really a beautiful way of enmeshing activity and passivity, as I've described. You know, we might think very naively of photography as just we take something in, there's an impression being made on something passive, but that's really the opposite. There's really this interplay between the receptivity and also things that are made by the medium, the greeniness and weird colors the film contributes, and also the dark room, that actual space of the dark room that is very that really encourages introspection and indeed might put you in a kind of trance state if you spend hours alone there. All of that, I think, is a really good metaphor for the mind, especially the more imaginative part of the mind, and maybe for any kind of art process. So yeah, those were my favorite artworks, especially the one with the little white horses and mountains. But yeah, they're all beautiful.
Great. We were really lucky with that dark room also, because it came almost at the last moment of the installation process, and the sound piece and Sun Yung Lee's photograph were not meant to be together at the start of our process. And then we realized there was something also earlier you mentioned something a bit uncanny in the artworks, and that was really revealed with the dark room and the sound, that the inner garden is not always pink and birds chirping and everything beautiful. It can be darker. And so, yeah, thank you very much for that outlook. And I'm really glad to see that you had that reaction with the artworks. This is really, really encouraging for us. Bettina or Jörg, do you want to talk about any?
Yeah. Definitely. I actually had a very hard time deciding which one I liked best. I feel really exceedingly positive about being included in this panel. It gave me a chance that I typically don't avoid myself of enjoying my reaction to really beautiful artwork. If your question is what I think represents best my thinking of the inner garden or the inner world, I would most likely go with the fragile veils image. I like that part, that the imagery of both dark and lighter veils with kind of the lighter at the center, and thus speaking to that positivity that I talked about before. But I'd also like to add that personally, the one that I was most drawn to were actually the Dreaming Wall pictures. I listened to your introduction to the art pieces, and I looked at the pieces before that, and only through your introduction, I actually realized that, yeah, you can get that unsettling feeling from that image as well, that you have a room overtaken by plants. You could see something destructive in that image. For me, it symbolizes more a passage of time. And when one thing, the room, decays and becomes old, something new can still grow out of it and be vibrant. And the light that was included in the images kind of symbolized that for me. So I really loved the pictures and I found them very inspirational. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that outlook. We are really, really glad.
Should I have a go?
Please.
Good. So I think there are different pictures that different artworks that sort of speak to different things to me. I think, like Marie, I really like Zangal dream photographies, and I think one thing I like about them, I think they're for me closest to the topic of heterotopia in the sense, because they're basically generate spaces that we couldn't have humanly imagined in a way, or like that they're not imagined human spaces. So they're spaces that are made by non-anticipatable processes of film decay, of chemical reactions on the film, and they interact then with sort of a fairly controlled way of taking an image of a space. So and these two things sort of over like coming together in one image, creates a kind of space that is another space, like a familiar space is turned into a non-familiar space, a space of that is other than what I could have deliberately done in a way. So I think it's a really beautiful take on heterotopia, and sort of have stunning images. And I particularly like the one on the bottom left with the trees, and they're shot through this with these like dots that you don't know whether they're before or behind or shine through everything. So there's basically there's something about these little dots in them that you cannot spatially place anymore, but you see a space. and so I think that's a really beautiful way of the heterotopia. In terms of the inner garden, it's obviously Sun Young Lee's, because sort of that's a cultivated home, that's culture, and sort of that there's a way in which any kind of cultivation is the cultivation of a garden, and so nature is inescapably part of it. So it's in a way a reminder of that our inner gardens and our outer gardens are basically both nature and culture, and neither just one. And so it breaking through is sort of a nice image of this sort of fragile balance between them. And it's also sort of it's beautiful sort of how culture gives sort of, to have a window like this or doors like that give different opportunities for coming in. I don't know. I sort of kind of I think that's a good. I really like that with in terms of the inner garden metaphor. I think that's slightly different from the heterotopia. I think these are different kind of things in my head, inner gardens and heterotopia. And the third one, sort of I already mentioned it, and that is sort of related to introspection. How can we sort of turn on ourselves and sort of get a sense of ourselves, and the difficulties that involves is really beautifully done, I think, in this triptych of these veils, where you used to have sort of a triptych that show you some kind of, so the essence is, I don't know, Jesus and Mother in the middle, and then on the side, like, so it's like things that show you immediately what it's all about. They show you basically just the triptych of veils. And I thought that's a beautiful. So you see them, you see basically the wind blowing through them. You see that they're not empty. They're sort of full of life in a way. And there's something going on behind them, but we will never see it straight. And I think that's a beautiful way of sort of like, I don't know, almost like a metaphor of how introspection will not just let us see our nature. And on the topic of inner nature, I think there's Jan Walik paintings are the nicest one, which is not to say that the Gilpin or the lens things are not good, but sort of if you want to know which three of them sort of immediately spoke to aspects of the topic, I think introspection, heterotopia, and inner garden, I think these are my top three.
Great, thank you very much. This is really, really helpful, and we should have asked you before writing the catalog. Maybe it could have been really, really good. And yeah, it's a pleasure for us to hear your point of view on the artworks, and to see how we can have new understandings with each person. Considering that it's 7:20, I think that Sophie will host the Q&A session until the rest of the event, if I'm right, Sophie?
Yes. Yeah, I'm sorry, I have problems with my computer. Yes, so now if anyone in the audience has questions to ask, either directly to the whole panel or intended for one specific guest speaker, you can go ahead.
Well, I think I'll start then. I just wanted to ask what the panel thought. Well, Jörg went a bit into detail about the process of Zangal, but I wanted to know more about what your thoughts were on the process of the artist. I don't know if you had time to actually read the exhibition catalogue, but perhaps if you didn't, I can explain some of them. For a piece such as Abigail Lentz, who does automatic drawing based on her emotion, the combination of the emotion and the material photos of her past.
Actually, I'd like to just make a general point in terms of the techniques that I saw described in the catalog. It was something that just spoke to me, that all of them seem to have a measure of losing control in order to get to their desired what I desired to, through the process, to actually create that artwork, be that using a film that is expired, and so that you don't really have any control over what the image that you're going to take is going to look like. And you saw similar aspects reflected in the other methods as well. And that was something that really spoke to me in regards to, in the art, it seemed to create a sense of, well, you might say harmony, or it made it made a beautiful impact on those images. In the psychological sense, often a lack of control is seen as unhealthy, as something that really distresses people. I saw that in the art as a complete counterpoint here, and I haven't really thought that through fully, but I wonder if that is one aspect that really adds to kind of a healing process when you look at art and are able to process the emotions that it evokes in you.
I think Marie raised her hand before, if I saw.
I'm happy to drop that question. That was a question to the curating team, really. A very general question. I wanted to know a bit about what the process was for identifying and selecting these specific artists, whether there was a sort of call for contributions, or whether that was, you know, those were artists you knew and liked, or yeah, I mean, I don't want to you know, make that question take too much time, but just out of curiosity.
I think more so we scanned the whole internet and we came together as a collective, thinking about what we were interested in, how we were feeling, and what we liked. And then we generally started, and we found our concept, and then we started collecting works that fit into that category. And reflected what we wanted to achieve as well with this exhibition.
I'll just add, oh, sorry, my bad. Please go ahead. Just add the fact that we really wanted to have two types of artworks, which were more photographs and paintings, and quite paradoxically, as you highlighted before, the photographs are supposed to be really automatic process and truthful in the transcription of reality. But with Zangal, for example, we discovered that photographs can be as manipulated and coming from something random and subconscious, like Gilpin's painting, for example. So that was something we had in mind from the start before selecting precisely every artwork. That was like a line that we kept in mind. And then we moved around those lines. Also, well, typically technical things about shipping and everything kind of played a role in the decisions. And in the end, yeah, that's how we got it. The artworks we love so much, and we don't want to send them back. We have to.
Yeah, I think there was just some real satisfaction in our picks as well. And when we saw them online, they looked amazing. And then when we saw them in person, it was a whole different world.
Well, thanks for sharing all that. Yeah, it's really beautiful to put together.
Sorry, since Marie turned the tables on you now, and we started to interview you, I want to continue along that line. So I remember sort of something like I forgot for 10 years, and then recently I started to remember. Now it's sort of my weapon of choice. Yeah, when I presented my PhD project for the first time in Frankfurt at the Institute of Social Research, there was an old professor I taught who taught me in Heidelberg before, and then he said, after me, he came to me and said, "Yeah, Jörg, that's all good and fine, but why don't you work on something interesting?" Yeah, and then sort of, and this is sort of the I found this really important in a sense that I think he was right. Yeah, I didn't think long and hard enough about why is that so important to me. Yeah, why is that something I should spend so much time and energy on, and sort of, and I'm just interested in your thoughts now that you've done this exhibition. Yeah, sort of what is the most so I think it's particularly difficult if you're a group of people, yeah, and you probably have different ideas and things like that, sort of, but what do you think is the most, why is this exhibition important to you, and sort of and what is sort of the most important thing for you about this exhibition? It's sort of a bit I don't know, ad hominem question, but I'm, the older I get, the more I get tired of people doing things without really caring about why they do them anymore. So I was just wondering, so what is it you care about in regards to this exhibition, and what sort of, also I think now that the artworks are there, what is it that you cherish most about them? Mean question, yeah, but you ask us. So I
Thank you to have to pick a brave starter.
Well,
go ahead, John, please.
I mean, I can only speak for myself in answering this, but I feel like we really have achieved what we wanted to do, which was kind of a moment of suspension and kind of challenging a bunch of dichotomies about spaces and that kind of thing. And really, I sat in the room the other day with the artwork, with the Dreaming Will Be, for like 30 minutes or 40 minutes just staring at it. And I felt like we've really achieved that moment of suspension and done what we set out to do. And I feel like that is something that we really need at the moment, and everyone needs.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that was a moment of suspension and escapism was something we went to at the start of the year in October. We saw two ways in COVID times. Either we do something related to COVID, either we do something unrelated to COVID. And we decided to go to the more escapism road. And that was an idea from the start. And as John said, create a moment of suspension, a moment of introspection without being too directive. That was, and opening a door and saying, now you can do whatever you want. That was our interest. Hoping that.
I think since I'm asked, I think it's an impression I got since I sort of started to engage with the artworks you've collected there. So they're all sort of open up breathing space somehow. You know, they're not. We have this, I don't know, locked in lives in a way, feel restrained and in all kinds of ways, but sort of I think they really open up a way of thinking space and openness that doesn't rely on the typical ordinary sense of space in a way that you have to, I don't know, be able to go to the pub and back and inside the pub and blah, blah, blah. So all kinds of things like this. So I think that they have a quality of openness to them, all of them. They can an interpretive openness, the sort of this heterotopia, like you don't know where to place them, so they're outside the COVID restriction realm, and blah blah blah. So I think that you really achieved to curate an exhibition that gives people a sense of space, and I think that is just because I wanted to say it's not unrelated to our times. I think so. Feels like a timely exhibition that serves a really beautiful purpose right now. Even though it's tangential and doesn't touch on it head on. And I think that would be probably very problematic, but I think it really satisfies the need. And I really enjoyed watching this and being part of that. So I also wanted to say thank you for making this possible and bringing this exhibition together.
Yeah, I think that it was inescapable that everything going on wasn't going to encroach, but what we wanted to do was not be completely direct about it and to create something like positive. I mean, I've said that a lot of times, but say it again.
Thank you very much. That was that was a year of work and the first experience for all of us. It was really nice to have that experience, and we are really happy to have this talk too. Sophie, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm gonna sorry, I'm gonna share my screen again. And no, sorry, having technical issues. Yes, sharing my screen essentially to say thank you very much to our panelists for taking the time to participate in this event and for the captivating insights that you shared with us. And thank you also to everyone who joined the event. And finally, before ending, if it works, before ending this Zoom meeting, I invite you all to join us for our next online event. It's going to be a conversation with a painter, Jan Velik, and it's going to happen next Monday, 21st of June at 5:30 p.m. And we gonna be able to find the, here it is, that's what I wanted to show. You will find the Zoom link on the Art Exchange website, as it was the case today. And yeah, we hope to see many people come to this which is going to be a really interesting talk with the author of this beautiful triptych that we are really happy to show, and really happy to see that many of you really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, everyone.
And thanks to you for sharing your work and the work of the artists with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, and have a good evening, and thank you very much.
Thank you to you too.
Thank you.